Eric Schmidt of Google recently said that children have only two states, either asleep or online, which makes today's discussion roundtable from BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT, all the more important. We're looking at the subject of children being digitally savvy, but are they information savvy, and the importance of e-safety training for our young ones. Teachers, students, parents are very familiar with the ideas of stranger danger when our youngsters interact with people socially on a face-to-face basis, but similar principles need also to apply in the online world. So to discuss this issue, we have with us today Jeremy Barlow from BCS. Hello. We have Dave Miles from Family Online Safety Institute.
Good morning, Brian.
We have James Garnett from the United Church Schools Trust.
Morning, Brian.
And we have Alan Earl, who's a police officer on secondment to the South West Grid for Learning.
Hello, Brian.
Can I just start off by talking about the importance of our children being safe in the online world? Perhaps we could start with your views on that.
Absolutely. Safety is important in any child's life, and I think the internet has changed the way sometimes that we view safety and online safety. The internet and the technology behind the internet is brilliant. It's engaging, it's dynamic, and it's used in that way by children across the board in such a fantastic way. But obviously with any tool, there is inherent dangers. There are pluses and minuses with any tool. And I think sometimes adults fail to understand that. No school would actually look at somebody coming into the schoolyard with a large knife and send them to the domestic science lab. However, with internet safety, there seems to be a difficulty because they'll send them to the IT technician, or with a parent, they'll go to the school. There's a lack of understanding that this is a whole big issue. I think it's more important for children as they get older these days because of the scale of the internet, because of the audience that can see material that children and young people post online. And there is a permanency of what they're putting online in that environment. So I think safety needs to look at the holistic picture rather than just simple terms.
Right. James, your thoughts?
Children are often only as good as the tools they use and experiment with, and their peers use, so they'll be very confident with tools like Facebook because that's what they use and heavily involved with. But they lack the life experience of the real world and take the experience they have in the real world and implement that into the online world. Whereas you look at teachers and parents have those real world experiences and understand some of the risks associated with the real world, but they often lack those skills in the online world because they don't embrace it in the same way that children do.
Thank you. Dave?
Absolutely, I concur with that, and I think this generational divide between adults and children is quite a problem. Whereas most parents historically have been able to teach their children to cross the road or learn to swim, this current generation of adults have not used technology in the way that their children are using them. So they're not well equipped to deal with online safety. And the pressure on parents in society these days means they're often time poor. And so therefore there is often a breakdown in dialogue between those two. And so what the child is doing is often far removed from what the parent's actual perceptions are. So within that, online safety is a real issue.
Yeah. Jeremy?
I think a key point is that technology is increasingly part of everyday life, and in particular for young people these days. Whether that's life at home, whether that's life in the school environment, and so on and so forth, technology is pervasive in their lives. Indeed, some recent statistics from the EU Kids Online survey stated that 59% of 9 to 16-year-olds have a social networking account. And I think it's a key thing for society in general, for enabling the information society, let's say, to equip these young people with the necessary skills, knowledge and understanding in order to manage the risks associated with the prevalence of that technology and the use of that technology.
Okay, good. Now, as is always the case when we're talking about school children, there's responsibilities for different areas laid in different directions, don't there? We have the parents, we have teachers, we have service providers, we have the children themselves. So where should the split be in this particular issue? I would imagine, as you're all from different backgrounds, you might have different views on this. Perhaps we could start with James, as you're from a schools trust. What do you feel about that question?
I think the responsibility is across the board. As schools and as educators, we can work with the children, we can raise the issues with them, we can highlight where the risks might be. They don't always take it on board, and you'll talk to children about setting privacy settings, and the end of the conversation with them, they'll turn around and say, well, no, I'm not going to change my privacy settings. I'm quite happy with it. But we can raise the risk, we can highlight where they ought to be more cautious. But we have a duty also to educate the teachers, because the teachers themselves are not as educated in using social networks. And recent talk with teachers in one of our schools, over half of them didn't have social networks, didn't use Facebook. Right. But they are working with children who are actively using it as a tool to communicate with their peers. And I think we therefore need to work with the children within the schools and the teachers themselves.
Well, there's instantly a disparity there. 59% of children between 9 and 16 have a social networking experience, and less than 50% of the teachers do. Isn't that right? Dave, can I ask you your sort of take on that?
Yeah, I suppose we come from a sort of slightly different position in this as a Family Online Safety Institute, in as much that we represent about 30 of the largest players in the world as a charity. We're based in Washington, DC and London, and we're on the advisory councils of people like Facebook and Symantec and others. And so we see upstream really their efforts, many of these executives are parents themselves, to make these things safer. I think the other thing that you can't underestimate is that these are very innovative technologies. And so therefore there is a degree of disruption to social norms which even the best business plans of some of these companies can't anticipate. So we're going through a revolution really in the way that technology is impacting society. And one of the ways we sort of try and frame that, because it's a global phenomenon, it's not just a phenomenon in the UK. In fact, very often the issue is that these technologies come from other countries with different legislation and different practices. And we talk about the notion of digital citizenship really, which is trying to bring back the online responsibilities, the cultural responsibility online, back to real world values and systems. And so there's a big debate in the community of online safety professionals around the world about that. And that includes a lot of people. It's not just parents, service providers and teachers, but it's law enforcement, it's governments, and children themselves at the heart of this, who have a real voice actually, and who often get excluded from the discussion, and yet they're the most knowledgeable of all. So that's how we look at it, and it's a real challenge, it's constantly changing. If you look at things like social media, that wasn't there 5 years ago, and it appears. And so all of those stakeholders have a duty really to cooperate and work together to try and fix what is something that has a massive societal impact.
As a police officer on secondment, Alan, you must have a different perspective on this.
I have several perspectives on it. I believe quite firmly in what's been said that it's an across-the-board responsibility. I don't think it's a particular responsibility of one sector of society. But I'd like to concentrate on the parents' side of things if I can. And through the grid, we've spoken to parents across the southwest region for about 3 years now, over 7,000 parents. And although the digital divide, I think, is starting to narrow, is starting to come smaller, and the understanding of parents is increasing with the use of the likes of Facebook and YouTube and big organisations, online organisations like that, I still think there is a lack of dialogue that goes on between parents and children. This is often reflected when I go into schools and talk to children, and children engage with what I'm saying because I'm challenging their online behaviours, which doesn't seem to happen from their parents. And often the parents don't quite understand the social way in which they're using the internet. So I think parents are just one part of the jigsaw, but a vital area to aim at in trying to educate them, to actually just speak to their children, to make sure they are safe and they feel comfortable with actually coming and talking to them when something goes wrong online.